The scene then cuts to a chamber where that same woman from the kidnapping is sitting. She appears annoyed while saying she never expected a beast like Jin to be on their payroll, and she's talking about the mercenary who's really a force to be reckoned with. The man just stays quiet, so the woman goes on, saying if she'd known he was working with SW Corporation, she would have handled things a lot differently. In fact, she probably wouldn't have taken the gig at all. The man acts all clueless, but the woman tells him not to play dumb. She points out that Jin, the mercenary, always keeps his face covered, but she recognized his eyes because she'd crossed paths with him before. She mentions that about 6 months ago, Jin vanished off the radar, and there were all sorts of rumors about him retiring or even being dead. She never thought he'd end up working for SW Corp. The man's response remains the same, and he further states that he can't make sense of any of it. You see, he's heard a thing or two about that mercenary and thinks it's pretty hilarious to imagine one of their guards being a top-notch mercenary. The woman eventually just stops arguing because, let's be real, talking to this guy is like trying to reason with a brick wall. A bit later, we're at the SW Corporation's medical center, and the first person we see is Lady G chilling in one of the wards. I used to think she was a total villain, but it turns out she's not that bad, but just super curious about our guy. We also spot her guard hanging around. When GA asks what he's doing here since he took a bullet, he casually says he can handle simple stuff just fine. GA's not having any of that and tells him to head home and rest up, because one less guy on duty isn't going to make a huge difference anyway. The guard states that he just can't rest, feeling responsible since the whole mess happened while he was off shift. He further explains that the mercenaries were working from abroad, and they still haven't figured out who they were working for. Even the mercenaries themselves don't know their client, since multiple middlemen were involved. GA's mode turns sad as she reflects on how first Yeona was targeted, and now she's been kidnapped as well. She asks him if it's all just a coincidence. The guard shakes his head, saying it's definitely not a coincidence. Well, this just makes GA even more down. GA then thinks about how our guy handled the whole situation like a total badass, and he was looking even more impressive than during training. She reminds her guard that he's really not just an average teenager after all. The man agrees, acknowledging that he's definitely not an average guy. In her mind, she thinks to herself that Grandpa must know Jin's real identity since he put the kid on their security team. She then recalls that Jin had multiple fractured ribs and detached fingernails from fighting off the kidnappers, not to mention a deep cut on his shoulder from a missed bullet. The guard then points out that Jin had been clinging to their vehicle during the attack and must have gotten those injuries when he fell off. GA's face goes pale as she realizes that Jin managed to fight off all those thugs even with all those injuries, and even took on 5 men with knives while she was unconscious. Well, that just adds another layer to the situation, and her face looks even more shocked than before. The guard agrees that it doesn't make much sense, but it's surprisingly true that Jin was able to pull all that off. GA quickly stands up from her bed, rushing toward the door and heading straight to the ward where Jin is admitted. As soon as she bursts into the room, she finds him getting suited up again in SW uniform. When Jin looks around, he spots GA and her guard. The lady doesn't waste any time and immediately asks him what the heck he's doing getting dressed. Jin explains that he's going home since he hasn't been there for 2 days. GA reminds him that he has serious injuries and can't leave until they're done treating him. Jin explains that he'd rather rest and heal at home. GA starts shouting, telling him not to be ridiculous, and asking who gave him permission to do something so rash. In response, our boy simply says it was the doctor who told him. Despite all of Jai's protests, Jin simply packs his bag, and the lady further asks him how he plans to explain this to his family. Jin in response points out that the bruises on his face can easily be explained by saying he got hurt during training. GA is annoyed to see how this guy has an answer for everything. She then tells her guard that she needs a moment alone with Jin. Once the guard steps out, she tells Jin that she wants him to come work for her after he graduates. Our boy looks at her, and GA states that there's nothing in it for him if he stays with Yeona because, as she puts it, she's just a child. She goes on to explain that Yeona only has her inheritance from her parents, but she doesn't have the means to secure her own future. GA, on the other hand, claims she can guarantee our boy a safe and secure future. After a moment of silence, Jin says he has one question. Hearing this, GA assumes he's probably curious about the salary, so she quickly tells him not to worry, as she'll make sure he's paid more than he can imagine, with plenty of extra benefits on the side. But Jin flatly refuses to have such thoughts, and instead asks what she meant by him staying with Yeona. The woman remains quiet for a moment, then abruptly asks if he's dating Yeona, to which Jin flatly says he's not. But GA thinks to herself that Yeona always waits for him during training, which probably means she has a serious crush on him. Anyway, she tells him to come and work for her when he graduates, promising to make his family happy and get him a good job right away. Jin seems to find the offer tempting, but he doesn't say much in response, and just tells her that he'll think about it. Later, back at the apartment, we see Yeona and Grandpa, and they both get utterly shocked when Jin explains that he got hurt during training. Grandpa asks if it's something serious, to which Jin reassures him that it's not, stating that it's just blisters on his fingers, and the doctor said it wasn't anything to worry about. The old man then asks his grandson if the security team he's working with is really what he wants to pursue in the future. Jin doesn't give a definitive answer, only saying that it's what he's interested in for now. Grandpa reminds him that even if it's what he feels like doing right now, he can always change his course if he finds something else he's passionate about down the line. Since Jin is still young, Grandpa adds that he'll support him no matter what he chooses to do. Jin smiles in response and agrees with his grandpa. Grandpa then feels a bit awkward and asks if he suddenly jumped into a heavy topic. He mentions that high school seniors are often worried about their future careers and wonders if he might have busted his chops. Yona snickers at this and reassures Grandpa that he didn't say anything wrong. Jin, meanwhile, has no idea what busting chops even means. The scene then transitions to a familiar camp where we see that same eye patch guy. His lackey reports that 032 went off course without notifying anyone, and suspects it might be because he heard the news about 001 being targeted for elimination. The eye patch guy just scoffs, calling 032 a fool. He says that no one should let their emotions dictate their actions when one of their brothers gets killed, which is precisely why he believes that having a family is absolutely useless. Meanwhile, we catch a glimpse of a mysterious man,